Today I am going to read Chapter 5 next to our new iPad cart. Chapter 5. Mr. Peach grinned. It must have been a very large grin because it even showed under his big mustache. "Forgive me," he said, "I was pulling your leg." "What do you mean?" asked Fergal. "Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers," said the tiny voice. "Where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked?" "Huh?" said Fergal. 1 minute the whoever whatever in the hole had been calling for help, and now he, she, or it was reciting tongue twisters. "There's no one down there, Fergal," Mr. Peach explained. "I was having a bit of fun with you. I am a ventriloquist." "You just said those pickling words," gasped Fergal, "but I didn't see your lips move." Mr. Peach swelled with pride. "Hardly surprising that the great big mustache to hide them behind," muttered a distinctly unimpressed Joshua. Mr. Peach's cheeks went peach-colored. "Don't be rude, Joshua," snapped Jackie. The twin muttered an apology. "Say something else, Mr. Peach," urged Albie. Mr. Peach stopped in his tracks and put the luggage on the ground. He opened his valise and produced not a ventriloquist's dummy, but a strange glove puppet of a snake, which he proceeded to slip over his left hand. The snake then opened and closed its mouth as it appeared to recite the following poem. "I used to think the world was flat, not rounded like a bowler hat. I used to think the sky was blue, but I was told that's nothing new. I used to think the sea was wet, that's something one should not forget. I used to wish my poems rhymed, and I still do it all the time. And I still do wish it all the time." Fergal was impressed. Even though he ignored the puppet and looked directly at Mr. Peach, there was nothing to suggest that the man was really doing the talking. It wasn't just that his lips weren't moving. His Adam's apple in his neck wasn't moving either, and there was nothing in his expression to suggest that he was trying to look as if he wasn't talking, if you see what I mean. He really seemed to be watching the snake and listening to the poem, too. Mustache or no mustache, there was no denying that Mr. Peach was a good ventriloquist. He pulled the snake glove puppet off his hand, stuffed it back into his valise, and picked up the luggage. "Come on," he said. "If you want to get to the city, we'd better get moving and try to get that lift." Fortunately for the passengers off the bus, quite a crowd had formed on the other side of the hole. Those cars not occupied by people wanting to stand and gape at the hole, marveling at it appearing out of nowhere and speculating as to when and where the next one might form, were turning around and heading back the way they came. In other words, heading in the direction the bus was supposed to have gone. Many passengers who, like the McNallys and Mr. Peach, ventured around the hole were given lifts in next to no time. The gray-haired matron of honor-to-be was one of the first. Because Jackie insisted that she, Albie, Joshua, and Fergal, still dressed as an enormous baby, all travel together, people were unwilling to take them. The obvious excuse was no room, but, to be fair, a bunch of freckled-faced McNallys in their strange clothes might not be every driver's first choice of hitchhiker, even if she or he was driving an empty minivan. "It's been very kind of you to wait with us, Mr. Peach," said Jackie after yet another driver had refused them a lift, "but I think you'd be far more likely to get into town on your own." "But I hate to leave you like this," said Mr. Peach. We quite understand," said Jackie. "We can look after ourselves, can't we, Albie?" said Albie, pretending to be Joshua. "Of course we can, Joshua," said Joshua, pretending to be Albie. "Well, if you're sure," said Mr. Peach hesitantly. "But if you need help once you're in the city, look me up." He pulled his calling card out of his top pocket. "Call me if you need me, though I have a feeling we'll be meeting again anyhow." "Thank you," said Jackie, putting the card away carefully. Not 5 minutes later, the ventriloquist got a lift from a family who'd been planning a trip to an aunt in the country, but had now decided to turn around and head for home. Eventually, Jackie, Joshua, Albie, and Fergal did get a lift, not in the back of a truck full of pigs and straw, as usually happens in such stories, but in the cab of a breakdown truck. The driver was a very jolly man called Noble, and he was glad of the company. There was one big bench seat running the width of the cab, and they all squeezed in next to each other with their luggage fitted around them. Noble, who the McNallys all later agreed looked rather like a giant vegetable, a turnip or a rutabaga, but with hair sprouting out everywhere, was not only noble by name, but noble by nature. When he found out where they wanted to go, he drove them all the way to the back of the Dell Hotel. He would have driven them right up to the entrance, of course, but Jackie had specifically asked him not to do that. On the journey to the city, Noble had them singing car songs. You know the kind. 99 bottles of beer on the wall, row, row, row your boat, Old MacDonald had a farm, and one the McNallys hadn't heard before called I'll Tickle Thomas. When it was your turn to sing, you had to think up a new place to tickle Thomas. And then in the chorus, everyone had to remember, in the correct order, where Thomas had already been tickled. For those of you who hate singing join-ins, sing-along join-in songs, that journey in the breakdown truck would have been a living nightmare. But Noble and the McNallys had a great time. The twins, of course, wanted to tickle Thomas in rude places, but knew that Jackie wouldn't let them, so they did a lot of whispering of suggestions and giggling between them. Fergal wanted to tickle Thomas not under the chin or on the nose, but under the bridge or on the way home, which Noble thought was very clever. Fergal loved being in the cab, looking out at the road in front of them. The windshield was covered with squashed flies and bugs and could have done with a very good clean. But Fergal didn't care. This was great, and he didn't have to pretend to be a baby for fear of being thrown off. If the truth be told, he was glad that stupid hole had opened up in the front of the bus. This was much more fun. Although they'd lost time on the journey with the bus having broken down and having to wait so long for a lift, Noble drove his battered breakdown truck much faster than any bus could go, so Jackie and the others weren't that late for their rendezvous with LaFay. But late is late, and LaFay was nowhere to be seen. Noble drove off with a cheery wave from the cab of his truck, but didn't honk his horn. He probably guessed that Jackie and the others planned to stay at the hotel without necessarily telling them management or actually paying. Whilst the rest of the family were singing I'll Tickle Thomas with Noble, LaFay McNally was putting her plan into action. She'd met the other finalists at the Meet the Other Finalists finger buffet in the Bellhop Suite at 1 o'clock, and an hour later she'd met the press at the Meet the Press, being a photo call with some of the capital city's leading evening newspapers. The finger buffet had been a relief to LaFay. There hadn't been a finger to eat in sight, but nor was there a knife, fork, or spoon, so she deduced what a finger buffet must be. A buffet where you didn't eat fingers, but ate with your fingers. All the food was pretty much bite-sized. It tasted good, but she was really glad that she'd eaten the chicken sandwich and drunk the hot chocolate up in her room. That'd been the best sandwich and the best chicken LaFay had ever tasted. Apologies to any vegetarian readers for going on about it. LaFay now got to meet the two other finalists she hadn't already met, and liked them. Graham Large, whose dad owned large lunches, kept his distance, glaring at her whenever their eyes met by chance. Peggy Snoot was very polite and said, "How do you do?" and shook LaFay's hand. She asked her where she lived and whether she'd had a nice journey. When LaFay got all excited about the train and the taxi ride, Peggy listened politely, but she didn't say anything boastful or nasty, and when LaFay explained she'd never been on a train or in a taxi before. Anna Malting explained that she'd been in the toughest heats to get this far in the competition, so by rights she would have won already. But LaFay could see that she was really nervous underneath, and by the end of the buffet, they were chatting together happily about animals. Anna had 3 gerbils, 2 hamsters, and a guinea pig, but wasn't allowed a cat. LaFay told her about Smokey, but didn't mention that he wasn't a pet, but a rat catcher, because she imagined gerbils, hamsters, and guinea pigs were probably a bit like rats, so it might upset her. "Why is he called Smokey?" asked Anna. "Mom gave him that name," said LaFay. "She named all of us." "I wish I had a cat," said Anna, and the 2 girls found they'd become firm friends. The photo call with some of the capital city's leading evening newspapers wasn't quite what LaFay had expected. She wasn't sure what she'd expected, but it wasn't 3 very young and bored-looking men in crumpled suits. 2 had cameras with flash bulbs. The 3rd had a notepad and a pen. Malcolm from Tap and Type made a short speech as though talking to a room full of people, with the 4 finalists lined up behind him. The photographers took plenty of photos, and the man with the notepad sucked the end of his pen and didn't write anything down. When the photo call was finished, Malcolm passed a piece of paper headed "Press Release" to him. The man muttered his thanks and stuffed it in a pocket of his jacket. Just then the door burst open, and in came a man wearing an electric blue suit with a gleaming chrome camera around his neck. And this is a picture of one of the newspaper guys. But then the camera guy comes in. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said, sounding flustered. That's fine, said Malcolm, stepping forward. Which paper are you from? Large lunch latest, said the man in the blue suit, walking straight past him. Malcolm had obviously never heard of it. It's a newspaper for people who work in my father's company, said Graham Large, stepping forward grandly. My father thought his workers would like to see a picture of me on the front page of the next issue. He then turned his attention to the photographer. I was beginning to think you weren't coming, he snapped. So sorry, Master Large, said the man. He proceeded to take a series of stomach-churning pictures of Graham Large, preening himself like a peacock. I expect that if the poor employees of Large Lunches ever saw the final full-color photo on the front of their company newspaper, it put them off work for the rest of the day. LaFay didn't hang around to watch the one-boy photo session. This was the part of the itinerary where she had a free afternoon for sightseeing. In other words, she needed to go and wedge open the fire door at the side of the hotel, then meet Jackie, Fergal, Albie, and Joshua around the back. She took the elevator back up to her room and took a box of tissues from the ensuite bathroom. This would be thick enough to keep the door open and thin enough not to make it too obvious. As LaFay made her way back down the now familiar route of the drab fire exit stairs, her tummy had never felt so full in her life. She couldn't wait to get the rest of the family, except for grumpy old Captain Rufus, of course, up to her room to order them chicken sandwiches and hot chocolate. At the foot of the stairs at last, LaFay pushed the bar to the fire exit door and swung it open a fraction, ready to wedge the box of tissues in place. There was a loud ringing in her ears. She'd set off an alarm.